Chapter 5. Connor MacLeod reached his Porsche. The lights were still blazing and the engine running. He jumped inside and put the car into gear before tearing towards the exit to the garage. Broken glass from shattered windscreens crunched under the tires as he sped past the L junction. He hit the exit ramp at about 40 miles an hour, and the lights of the city were before him. Just as he reached the head of the ramp, a police car arrived and swung its hood into his path. He was blocked. He sat in the car and waited as other police vehicles began to screech to a halt behind the first one, their sirens still wailing. Out on the street, the New York traffic flowed past as if nothing were happening. A lean-looking cop climbed out of the vehicle that barred MacLeod's exit. One arm was hanging loosely by his side, while the other had a thumb hooked in his belt by his pistol. He stood by his own vehicle. "Get out of the car!" he shouted. MacLeod stared at him. He wondered whether to try ramming the police vehicle out of the way and making a run for it, but decided against it. There were too many of them. He would have to bluff it out. "Get out of the goddamn car!" shouted the officer again. This time his hand was on his gun butt and he had taken up an open-legged stance. MacLeod climbed slowly out of the Porsche and stood by it, his hand resting lightly on the roof. "Put your hands on the hood!" The gun was out now and aimed at MacLeod's chest. The officer was clearly nervous and his partner was half in, half out of the police car. He was talking into a mic, but his eyes never left MacLeod's face. "Move!" screamed the lean-faced one. Several other policemen were beginning to walk towards him now, but cautiously, the way one approaches a dog that has been known to bite. The officer in front of him flicked the gun barrel and licked his lips, as if the tension were becoming intolerable to him. Another twitch of the gun barrel. One of his fellow policemen called out softly, "Go carefully." MacLeod leaned passively against the car, his hands well in view. He made a slight gesture, showing the officer his empty palms. The policeman stopped advancing and took up the classic two-handed stance of someone about to open fire. "Watch it, freak!" he said to MacLeod. His voice was taut. "Just cool it!" His partner dropped the mic he was holding, stepped fully out of his vehicle, and drew his own weapon. "Watch it!" he cried. "Watch him! Watch him!" MacLeod allowed himself an inner wave of amusement. Surely they wouldn't gun him down here on the street. They didn't know what, if anything, he had done. Maybe that was the trouble. Policemen hated dealing with the unknown. They preferred, like anyone else, situations which had a familiar feel to them. He, MacLeod, was a freak who wouldn't do what he was told. They wanted him to jump around to commands, and he wasn't prepared to do that. Not yet, anyway. Frustration was evident on the cop's face as he cried out, "Move! Come on! Come on! Come on!" Repetition. What you can't obtain by volume of voice, repeat. What if he were a foreigner, or deaf, stone deaf? Would they think of that, or simply shoot when he failed to understand what they wanted of him? The situation might have been comic if there weren't so many bystanders watching who might get hit. Another policeman took up a position on the far side of the Porsche, aiming across the roof. MacLeod glanced at him, casually. The lean-faced one was becoming incensed. "Move! Come on! Come on!" He was close enough to MacLeod to touch him now. He reached out a hand and grabbed the Scot by the collar, slamming him against the car. MacLeod let out a grunt. The other took each wrist, one at a time, and smashed his hands down on the roof of the Porsche. He felt his ankles being kicked viciously. "Spread 'em!" Once again, he ignored the command. "Spread them, freak!" Another kick, this time higher up. "What are you, deaf?" So, he'd thought of it at last, but it wasn't a question. It was meant to be an insult. Deaf and stupid being synonymous terms in their language. "No, I'm not deaf." There were hands going over him now, searching for weapons. The cop was muttering, "Come on, come on," as though he were desperately hoping to find something concealed under the raincoat. MacLeod felt glad that he had not brought the samurai sword with him. He might have had to use it to protect his ownership of the blade. The last thing he wanted to do was hurt someone outside the group. The policeman leaned heavily against him. "Let's see some ID, pal," he said, reaching into MacLeod's inside pocket. He extracted a wallet and began to rifle through the contents, still keeping a wary eye on MacLeod. The cop's partner called to him. "You okay, Haggerty?" "Yeah, just looking at the bozo's ID." Finally, he found a piece of paper which told him what he wanted to know. "Well, Mr. Nash, where were you going in such a hurry?" MacLeod ignored him, and Haggerty gave him a jolt with his shoulder. "Eh?" The policeman from the far side of the Porsche had moved around now and stood by Officer Haggerty. Haggerty grabbed MacLeod's arm and snapped a cuff on his wrist, then spun him around to do the other wrist. MacLeod had had enough of this man, pushing him around as if he were some kind of recalcitrant dog in a school for obedience. He gripped Haggerty by the shirt collar with his free hand and thrust him away. "Take it easy," he said softly to the cop. "Give me it! Give me it!" shouted Haggerty, again reaching for the wrist. "Give me it!" MacLeod gripped the man by his lapels and hurled him away. Another policeman stepped forward, his gun pointing. "Hey! Hey!" "Just keep him off my back," said MacLeod. Haggerty came rushing back and pressed his pistol against MacLeod's temple. The second cuff was clicked on. "Don't move, pal! Don't even breathe!" His partner came up then. "Get in the car!" "No! Our car, dummy!" They bustled him into the black and white. Haggerty sat in the back of the vehicle, his gun pressed against MacLeod's ribs, while his partner drove. The New York lights drifted past them. MacLeod stared at the people loitering outside nightclubs and bars, or hurrying homewards, eyes turning neither right nor left. So many people. He had known a time when there were far fewer. Yet even then, it seemed that there was not enough space in the world to contain them, since they had been forever fighting over this patch of ground or that. Maybe it would all stop one day. But not if the Kurgan were the one survivor of the gathering. Not then.